The air in the daily grind always smelled like Old Spice and fresh coffee, a familiar comfort in the sleepy town of Cedar Creek. But on that Tuesday, a different scent hung heavy, the metallic tang of anticipation. Ilara Vance, 28, moved through the crowded tables in her crisp white shirt and signature red waistcoat, balancing a tray of sodas. She was watching the booth near the window. The man sitting there, cloaked in a worn jacket, was too silent, too still. His presence was a ripple in the calm daily rhythm. He gripped his black coffee as if tethering himself to the earth. His cap pulled low, concealing everything but exhaustion. Ilara, knowing the harsh realities of life in Cedar Creek, instinctively felt he was running from something, or perhaps hiding. Then, the bell above the door chimed a heavy, ominous note. 2 sets of heavy boots strode across the checkered floor. Officer Thorne and Officer Briggs had arrived. The room went instantly mute, every fork frozen mid-air. Their eyes fixed immediately on the lone man in the window booth, and Ilara knew, with a sickening certainty, that this quiet afternoon was about to shatter, and whatever secret that man carried was about to cost her everything she had. Ilara Vance was accustomed to the long hours and the constant need to calculate tips versus medical bills. She knew the regulars' orders before they sat down, offering a warm word or a quick laugh to lift the atmosphere. Today, however, her gaze kept returning to the stranger, a reserved figure who frequented the daily grind every few days. He was always polite, never spoke much, and she had filed him away as a transient, perhaps burdened by a past he preferred not to share in Cedar Creek. As Ilara refilled a pitcher of iced tea, the police entered. Officer Thorne, stocky and loud, took the lead, followed by Officer Briggs, whose expression was a permanent sneer. Their presence was aggressive, too deliberate, and it set a sharp prickle of unease down Ilara's neck. Thorne's eyes, after a swift scan of the room, locked onto the man in the booth. They advanced, hands hovering near their belts, a clear threat in their posture. Ilara watched from behind the counter, the dish rag clutched tightly in her hands. The man in the booth refused to meet their eyes, maintaining his silent vigil over his coffee. Thorne's voice broke the silence, loud enough to silence all lingering chatter. "Hey, buddy, you got some ID on you." The stranger's shoulders tensed, but he offered no reply. Briggs's voice was sharper, colder. "We're talking to you. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The tension was palpable. Every head in the diner was turned. Ilara knew Thorne and Briggs well. They were notorious in Cedar Creek for flexing their power, particularly against those who lacked the voice or resources to fight back. This situation felt particularly charged, like they were hunting for a confrontation. Finally the man spoke, his voice almost painfully low. "I'm just having coffee, not causing any problems." Thorne responded with a short, cruel laugh. "Not causing problems. You look like trouble to me. Let's see that ID or we're taking a walk." He loomed over the booth, imposing his size. The man's hands gripped his mug tighter, refusing to move. Ilara's own grip on the rag tightened. She glanced toward the kitchen, catching the eye of her boss, Ben, who was wiping down the grill. Ben gave a slight shake of his head, a silent, clear instruction to stay out of official business. But Ilara couldn't obey. She had grown up watching people in Cedar Creek, including her own family, be exploited because they lacked power. Her mother was sick, struggling with overwhelming medical bills, and her younger brother, Kai, barely 15, looked to her for strength. She could not simply stand by. Setting down the rag, Ilara walked toward the booth, her sneakers soft against the tiled floor. "Officers," she said, keeping her voice carefully steady. "He's just a customer, paid for his coffee, same as everyone else." Thorne wheeled around, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Stay out of this, Ilara. This doesn't concern you." Ilara stepped closer, planting her hands on her hips. "It concerns me when you're harassing someone in my diner for no reason. He's not doing anything wrong." The atmosphere became electric. Every eye in the daily grind was now fixed on Ilara. Briggs snorted, folding his arms. "Your diner. Last I checked, you just pour coffee here. Go back to your job, sweetheart. The condescending tone stung, yet Ilara stood firm. She looked at the man in the booth. He finally lifted his head, meeting her gaze. His eyes were deep-set and tired, hinting at vast experience, but in them Ilara saw a flicker of hope and gratitude. "I'm not going anywhere," Ilara declared, her voice rising to carry across the tense silence. "If you've got a real reason to bother him, say it. Otherwise, let him drink his coffee in peace." A wave of murmuring swept through the patrons. Some locals nodded their support. Others whispered anxiously. Thorne's face darkened, his jaw rigid. "You're making a big mistake, Vance," he hissed, moving toward her. "You don't want to be on the wrong side of this." Ilara's heart pounded, but she refused to yield. She pictured her mother battling illness and Kai depending on her to be strong. "I'm not the one making a mistake," she retorted, her voice clear. "You're the ones picking on someone who's done nothing to you. That's not what Cedar Creek is about." The man in the booth stirred, pulling his cap down further. "It's okay," he murmured, attempting to defuse the situation. "I'll go." Ilara shook her head quickly. "No, you stay. You've got as much right to be here as anyone." She turned back to the officers, her eyes unyielding. "If you want to take someone out of here, it's not going to be him." The diner was plunged into an absolute, suffocating silence. Thorne and Briggs exchanged a look. Their certainty seemed to waver. The crowd was mobilized. Phones were subtly being lifted to record the confrontation. Madame Dubois, a local woman who had known Ilara since childhood, spoke up from a nearby table. "She's right. Leave the man alone." Another voice chimed in from the rear. "Yeah, what's he done?" A low tide of agreement began to spread throughout the room. Thorne took a step back, his face a complex mixture of fury and uncertainty. He pointed directly at Ilara. "This isn't over," he threatened in a low voice. Then he signaled to Briggs, and the two officers shoved through the exit. The jingle of the door seemed unnecessarily loud as they departed. The daily grind erupted into noise. Applause mixed with excited chatter. Ilara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her hands trembling faintly. She turned to the man, whose expression remained unreadable. "Are you okay?" she asked. He gave a small nod. "Thank you," he whispered. "You didn't have to do that." Ilara managed a weak smile, her stomach still knotted with adrenaline. "Yes, I did," she insisted. "Nobody should be treated like that." As she headed back to the counter, she noticed a young man in the corner, his phone still aimed. He flashed her a thumbs up, excitement radiating from him. "That was awesome," he said. "This is going viral." Ilara frowned, not fully grasping the implication, but the immediate demands of the buzzing customers, asking if she was okay, praising her courage, swept the thought away. Ben, her boss, pulled her aside later. His expression was a worried mix of pride and apprehension. "You're going to catch hell for this, Ilara," he cautioned quietly. Ilara nodded, knowing the precarious position she was now in. The man in the booth quickly finished his coffee, leaving a crumpled $10 bill on the table, and slipped out without a word. Ilara watched him go, consumed by questions. Who was he? Why had the police targeted him? There was a gravity about him, a silent, heavy weight. As the door closed, she felt both relief that the confrontation was over and a deep, nagging unease. She had acted rightly, but she worried about the price. The remainder of her shift blurred. Customers showered her with extra tips and endless retellings of the scene. But as the diner emptied, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that a major consequence was looming. Wiping down the counter, her red waistcoat felt heavier than usual. Whatever the future held, she had stood up for what was just, and that conviction, she felt, was worth something. She closed up the daily grind, leaving only the hum of the fridge and the faint aroma of grease. Her hands still shook from facing the officers, but she steadied herself, wiping the counter in deliberate, slow circles. The young man's words about going viral echoed in her mind. Locking the door, the neon sign outside cast a lonely red glow over Cedar Creek's quiet Main Street. Ilara pulled her jacket tight and walked home, utterly oblivious to the storm about to break. By morning, her phone was vibrating relentlessly. She woke to a torrent of notifications, texts, voicemails, even emails from strangers. Her brother, Kai, burst into the kitchen, his eyes wide with shock. "Ilara, you're everywhere." He thrust his phone at her, displaying a shaky video clip of her confrontation with Thorne and Briggs. The video cut off just as the officers exited, but her strong, clear voice rang out. "If you want to take someone out of here, it's not going to be him." Below the clip, a hashtag was spreading like wildfire. #StandLikeIlara. Millions of views, thousands of comments, likes, and shares followed. People hailed her as a hero, a voice for the vulnerable. However, the attention was not universally positive. "Troublemaker," read one comment. "She's going to regret this," warned another. Ilara felt her stomach twist as she scrolled. She handed the phone back to Kai, attempting to dismiss it. "It's just noise," she said, but her voice betrayed her fear. She prepared for work, securing her hair in her standard claw clip. Her waitress uniform felt less like clothing and more like a flimsy shield. At the daily grind, the mood had drastically changed. Customers stared as she served coffee. Some whispered, others brazenly requested selfies. A few steadfast regulars like old Monsieur Thompson squeezed her hand and offered quiet praise. "You did good, kid." But many others avoided her eyes entirely, their silence more potent than any criticism. Ben pulled her aside during a momentary lull. "The police stopped by this morning," he admitted, his face grim. "They didn't say much, but they're watching. Be careful, Ilara." The subsequent days were a blur of intense anxiety. The video continued its rapid spread, accumulating millions of views. News vans were stationed outside the diner, and reporters shoved microphones in her face as she walked to her car. "Ilara, why did you stand up to the police? Are you scared of retaliation?" they pressed. She kept her replies brief, her heart hammering. "I just did what felt right," she maintained, then ducked away. Cedar Creek no longer felt like the sanctuary it once was. One night, eggs were hurled at her car, the yolk drying into ugly, sticky streaks. Threatening notes were shoved under the diner's door, calling her a traitor and demanding she leave town. Kai found her weeping in the kitchen one evening, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she read a letter declaring, "You'll pay for this." He held her tightly, his voice fierce with loyalty. "You're not alone, Ilara. We'll get through this." The backlash was not confined to anonymous online threats. People she had known her entire life in Cedar Creek began treating her coldly. Madame DuPont, who owned the local bakery, ceased speaking to her. The town's police chief, who was a close associate of Officer Thorne, released a television statement dismissing the incident as a minor misunderstanding and offering public praise for his officers. Ilara felt the immense weight of the situation. Her mother's ever-rising hospital debt, Kai's worried glances, and the noticeable decline in the daily grind's business as fearful locals stayed away. She began to question her actions, wondering if her moment of bravery had cost her more than she or her family could ever recover. Then, the first inexplicable event occurred. A delivery truck pulled up to the diner one morning, and a man in overalls began unloading crates filled with brand-new, top-of-the-line kitchen equipment. Pots, pans, and even a gleaming professional coffee machine. "For Ilara Vance," the delivery man stated, handing her a folded note. There was no signature, only a typed message. "Keep standing tall." Ilara stared at the expensive crates, bewildered. Ben scratched his head, muttering, "Who has this kind of money?" A few days later, an even greater surprise arrived at her home. An envelope containing a new lease for the diner, paid in full for an entire year. Again, there was no name, no explanation, only the overwhelming relief of financial security. Ilara's mother, weakened but smiling from her hospital bed before being discharged, gripped her hand firmly. "Someone out there believes in you," she assured her daughter. The mysterious gifts continued to arrive. Groceries appeared on her porch. A stack of fresh tires replaced the ones that had been deliberately slashed on her car. Each delivery felt like a crucial lifeline, pulling her back from the psychological and financial brink. Online, #StandLikeAlara transcended a simple trending topic and blossomed into a genuine movement. People shared their personal stories of confronting bullies and fighting for justice. A student launched an online fundraiser for Ilara's family, successfully gathering thousands to cover her mother's medical expenses. Strangers sent heartfelt letters, calling her an inspiration. One note from a woman across the country particularly resonated. "I was afraid to speak up once. You showed me I don't have to be." Yet, the local pressure did not abate. Officers Thorne and Briggs were frequently seen back in Cedar Creek, their patrol cars circling the daily grind like predators. Ilara sometimes caught them staring through the window, their faces set and hostile. She forced herself to maintain her routine, pouring coffee and smiling at customers, but her hands shook every time the entry bell chimed. The mysterious man from the booth never returned, and Ilara remained constantly preoccupied with his identity and why the police had targeted him. His soft, whispered "thank you" echoed in her memory, a constant reminder of the reason she had spoken up in the first place. One evening, as she meticulously swept the floor after closing, a sudden shadow moved outside the glass door. Her heart leaped in fear, assuming it was another threat, but it was just a young boy, perhaps 10 years old. He quickly taped a crayon drawing to the window. It depicted a stick-figure waitress in a red vest, standing tall, with the words "My Hero" scrawled beneath in bright crayon. Ilara's eyes welled up as she watched the boy run off, his backpack bouncing. She peeled the drawing from the glass and tucked it into her pocket, her determination solidifying. Whatever challenges were still ahead, she was not backing down. As she locked the door, her phone vibrated with a new notification. The video was trending again, shared by an individual with an enormous social media following. The caption read, "Cedar Creek's bravest #StandLikeAlara." She gazed at the screen, the diner dark behind her, the town quiet save for the chirping crickets. The world was now watching, and while she didn't know the full implication of that, she knew one thing for certain. The fight was ongoing and someone somewhere was quietly protecting her. The warmth of Ilara's phone screen faded as she stood outside the diner, the cool night air refreshing her face. The #StandLikeAlara movement had become a nationwide symbol. In Cedar Creek, however, it still felt like a harsh, inescapable spotlight. Threats persisted. Angry voicemails and graffiti marked the back wall, but so did the stream of anonymous aid. A brand new commercial stove arrived one day, followed by a stack of aprons, each bearing a simple note, "For the fight." Ilara was consumed by questions. Who was funding this? Why were they so invested in helping her? Holding the boy's crayon drawing, a spark of hope mixed with a growing certainty that a massive event was imminent. The next morning, the daily grind was unprecedentedly busy. Locals flocked in, motivated by the viral story, and even strangers drove in from surrounding towns, desperate to meet the waitress who had defied the authorities. Ilara moved through the organized chaos in her white shirt and red waistcoat, her hair in its usual clip, maintaining a smile despite the exhaustion in her feet. Then she saw him. A man sat at the counter, his face obscured by a familiar worn cap. It was the quiet man from the booth, the genesis of the entire ordeal. As she approached, he looked up, his eyes steady and warm. "I owe you," he said, his voice quiet. "My name is Silas Thorne. I'd like to talk." Ilara's breath hitched. She caught Ben's eye, and he nodded, allowing her to lead Silas to a secluded corner booth. Silas spoke in measured tones, revealing his identity. He was a billionaire, a CEO who had suffered the loss of his wife years ago. He had moved to Cedar Creek specifically to raise his son, Leo, far from the invasive glare of the media. He explained that he had been maintaining a low profile that day, but officers Thorne and Briggs had recognized him and were aggressively seeking a personal payoff. "You didn't just save me physically," Silas said, leaning slightly across the table. You reminded me of what genuinely matters. I want to help you preserve this place, and what it represents. Before Ilara could fully comprehend his words, Silas slid a folder toward her. Inside were legal documents offering her full, immediate ownership of the Daily Grind, along with substantial funds required to completely renovate the establishment. No strings attached, he assured her. Ilara's hands trembled as she scanned the papers. It was too much too sudden. Why me? She managed to ask. Silas offered a faint smile, edged with a flicker of sadness. Because you stood up when no one else would, he explained. My son Leo calls you his hero. That's all the reason I need. Ilara spent the next week in a daze, the magnitude of the offer weighing heavily on her. She discussed it extensively with her mother, who was now home from the hospital and slowly recovering her strength. Take it, her mother urged, grasping her hand. You've always dedicated yourself to taking care of us. Now take care of you. Ilara signed the documents, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and fear. Her first act as owner was renaming the establishment the Heartstone Bistro, a name that reflected the deep, essential warmth she intended the place to hold. Renovations began at a breakneck pace. New booths were installed, fresh paint covered the walls, and a new sign casting a soft golden light was erected outside. However, the change was not welcomed by everyone. Victor, the owner of a rival local diner, quickly began spreading malicious rumors that Ilara was a fraud. He even stooped to paying neighborhood kids to smash the Heartstone Bistro's newly installed windows one night. Ilara arrived the next morning to sweep up the broken glass, her jaw tight with resolve, refusing to let Victor win. As the bistro took shape, Ilara implemented changes that reflected her values. She hired Finn, a homeless man who often lingered outside the old diner. Finn was timid initially but demonstrated fierce diligence, quickly mastering the grill and flipping pancakes with skill, his genuine grin illuminating the kitchen. Leo, Silas's son, began stopping by after school, sketching detailed designs for a massive mural that would adorn the bistro's main wall. He proudly called it his hero project, a painting depicting Ilara, the waitress, standing tall, surrounded by a supportive crowd. Ilara blushed whenever she saw it, but Leo's intense pride filled her chest with profound warmth. The spirit of Cedar Creek started to shift. Locals who had previously shunned Ilara began patronizing the bistro, drawn by the palpable energy of renewal. Madame Dubois, the woman who had first spoken up during the confrontation, organized a large community potluck to celebrate the Heartstone Bistro's impending opening. Even a few police officers, embarrassed by the notorious actions of Thorne and Briggs, discreetly stopped by for coffee, keeping their heads low but leaving surprisingly generous tips. Ilara's mother, now strong enough to contribute, baked specialized pies for the menu, her laughter filling the diner's halls for the first time in many months. Kai, Ilara's brother, took command of the bistro's social media presence, posting enticing photos of Finn's pancakes and Leo's developing mural, keeping the hashtag #StandLikeIlara movement vigorously alive. But Victor's sabotage persisted. He bribed a local health inspector to meticulously nitpick the Heartstone Bistro, threatening to close it down over trivial, minor violations. Ilara fought back by staying late every night, scrubbing every corner until her hands were raw, her determination steel-reinforced. When the bribed inspector returned, he could find absolutely no fault, leaving with a visibly sour expression. Word of Victor's underhanded tactics spread throughout Cedar Creek, and his own diner rapidly lost customers, his lies dissolving under the town's steadfast, growing loyalty to Ilara. By opening day, the Heartstone Bistro was completely packed, the line of customers stretching down the block. Leo's colorful mural shone brilliantly on the wall, and Ilara's mother proudly cut the ribbon, her eyes brimming with tears of joy. As weeks turned into months, the Heartstone Bistro truly became the beating heart of Cedar Creek. Families gathered for hearty Sunday brunch. Students used the booths as study spots. Finn, his confidence now soaring, began training new employees. Silas Thorne visited occasionally, always quiet, observing the scene with a subtle, affectionate smile. One evening he brought Leo, who rushed to Ilara, proudly presenting a new drawing of the bistro labeled simply, "Home." "You created this," Silas whispered to her, filled with emotion. "You turned this town around." Months later, a regional news station aired a feature story on the Heartstone Bistro, proclaiming it Cedar Creek's miracle. They interviewed Ilara, who stood resolute in her red waistcoat, her voice calm and firm. "I just wanted to do what was right," she said. "Kindness changes things. It's not always easy, but it's worth it." The story recirculated, and #StandLikeIlara trended nationally once more. This time, it was accompanied by photographs of the bustling bistro, Finn's smiling face, and Leo's magnificent mural. Letters of encouragement poured in from every corner of the country. People were inspired to show courage in their own communities, to fight for fairness, and to build something positive. Ilara stood behind the counter one quiet evening, wiping it down as a soft tune played on the jukebox. The bistro was finally hers, not merely a job, but a powerful, tangible symbol of what courage could achieve. She recalled the initial fear, the physical threats, the broken glass, and the nights she doubted her choice. Then she looked at her mother, laughing happily with customers, at Finn joking with Kai, and at Leo's mural shining brightly on the wall. Cedar Creek had been transformed. It was kinder and demonstrably stronger. And so was she. As Ilara locked up the Heartstone Bistro, the diner's warm, inviting glow spilled onto the quiet streets of Cedar Creek. She had stood up for an unknown stranger, weathered a storm of local opposition, and successfully built something beautiful from the emotional ashes. Her initial act of courage demonstrated that one small commitment to justice can ignite a massive wave of change, turning overwhelming fear into deep hope, and destructive division into unified community. The lesson was clear to everyone who walked through her doors. Standing up for what is right, no matter the difficulty, doesn't just alter that specific moment. It can utterly transform lives, profoundly inspire others, and successfully rebuild an entire town.